Hello, everyone. How are you guys today? I am Elizabeth Corey. I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com, and I am here today. I want to talk to you a little bit about interactions between parts. Actually, what I've been doing some thinking about is just that we need to understand as we're doing our own inner parts work that oftentimes our parts, the parts that are active, the parts that we're aware of, are often not the only parts that are actually in the picture in that moment. As a matter of fact, most of our inner parts are interacting with other parts. It's just we are only kind of sensing or aware of one side of it. So today I want to talk a little bit about some of the most famous parts battles we may be having in our system and what that will look like on the surface. Because when parts are really battling it out internally, what often happens is confusion, and the system can be really confused, but also the sort of manifestations of that battle can be very confusing. It's not clear that that's actually happening or what's happening. So it can really help to not only understand what the parts battles may be in our system, but also what that actually looks like on the outside. It can be complex, as is just in general learning how to look at the internal psyche. Obviously, that's a pretty big task. But if we can start to get a sense for what these battles look like, we may be able to identify them a little more easily when they are happening to us, because they can be pretty intense at times. So if you have any questions as I talk about this, please feel free to ask away. I am here to help you in answering those questions. And so, as I said already, I'm just going to kind of repeat this part of the message because it's so important. None of our inner parts actually live in a vacuum, okay? All of our inner parts are a part of what we call a system, right? I mean, the whole concept of internal family systems, even external family systems, what we're talking about is how a particular individual lives within a big system of something. They are interacting with their world as they know it. When we talk about external family systems, we're talking about, a child and how they interact with their siblings or their mother or their father or uncle. When we're talking about internal family systems, we're talking about how each one of our parts interacts with other parts. And generally, when a part gets really, really loud and when we are feeling a lot of pain, it is often because there's another part arguing with them. There's another part really close by, and they're actually in a battle. And so I like to refer to this particular live stream as famous parts battles and how they manifest. So that's really what we're going to talk about. And what I've done is I've come up with some examples, and I've also come up with examples of what that actually looks like. Like when it's happening, what are we going to notice in our system? Because the truth is, if this was as easy as a part going, hey, I'm active and I'm arguing with this other part, and very clearly I'm telling you that, then great, you wouldn't need me. None of us would need any of this really complex psychological stuff we're always researching. But it's not that simple. It's quite complicated. And so today I'm going to break down several. I think I have like 5 listed, but I've already got another one in my head. So we'll see how much time we have. 5 different possible parts battles, and maybe a 6th if we have the time for it, that may exist within our system and what that's going to look like to us on the surface. Because if we don't know that, we can't go much further. So starting off, I'm going to talk about the controller versus the freedom fighters. Now, if you're unaware of my part structure and what that looks like, I'm going to talk a little bit about that really quickly. The controller is what is often referred to in the mainstream or spiritual, like different books and writings as the ego self. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the controller. The controller is the king of the defenders. The defenders is a group of parts who have as their number one priority safety. They are focused almost completely on keeping you safe. However, Their methods for keeping you safe, which I sometimes refer to as survival skills, are not necessarily really going to keep us safe. They might have done at least a halfway decent job when we were children, but they are not going to do it now. And they will try to avoid, emotional expression. They don't see that as safe, or, standing up for ourselves, setting boundaries, things like that. So those are your defenders. Then we have the freedom fighters. The freedom fighters is another group of parts who have no interest in safety. As a matter of fact, they have very little fear at all. And so their main goal is going to be authenticity. They want us to be the most authentic we possibly can be. And unfortunately, as children, we learned very fast that that was a bad idea. And so the freedom fighters are often not very accessible to us because the defenders are in charge. A group of parts is a group of parts you'll be very familiar with, which is our inner children, right? So when I talk about all these different parts today, they fall into one of those three categories. And generally speaking, parts in different groups will battle with each other, but also parts within groups, especially the defenders, will also battle with each other. So starting off, the controller, who is the king of the defenders, fighting with the freedom fighters. It's a very common battle in our system. And many of us are doing it, and actually doing it a lot. It's happening quite regularly. Because while the freedom fighters have often been suppressed in a lot of our systems, they aren't being suppressed quietly. They are often very, very active, even though we may not be able to hear from them. A lot of my clients will say things to me like, I can't figure out what I want. I can't figure out who I am. I don't know these things. It's like I have to take my cues from other people. Well, that's on purpose based on the way that you were raised in childhood. You were taught that your internal guidance system and your understanding of what it meant to be who you are was wrong. So you shut it down. And a part of shutting that down meant suppressing those freedom fighters. But they're still there, and they're still kind of screaming at us. It's just that our defenders are louder. And so this is the battle. The controllers screaming at us that we just need to do what we're told, and the freedom fighters screaming at us that we need to stop doing what we're told because it is not really who we are and what we want. And so a lot of times this battle will show up in our system as anxiety. The anxiety gets really intense. It usually means in that moment that we're facing something where we're making a choice that's not authentic because it is pleasing other people. It is making other people happy. But we're not setting a boundary. We're not being authentic. And in the background, we have a pretty loud group of parts saying, I do not agree with this decision, right? So that brings on the anxiety. So whenever you're feeling anxiety, it is important to try to connect on a deeper level with yourself and see what's going on in here. Like, what is it that I'm agreeing to that my parts clearly do not want me to agree to? At least some of my parts do not want me to agree to it, right? So we're really looking for that battle in the system. The more that we become connected to our most authentic parts, and also that grounded adult self, which is far more than a part, it is who we are, the more we will be able to reduce the anxiety we feel when we make decisions. It comes with time, though, because at first we will often have the resistance from the parts who think we should do what we're told. That also can create anxiety. That doesn't necessarily mean that the defenders are right in those moments. So learning what these parts are saying to us when we are feeling anxiety can be very helpful. And what I tell my clients a lot of times to do is, if you're feeling anxiety kicking in, that means you have likely a defender controller battle with your freedom fighters happening. And it's time to gonna start off the writing with a little bit of controller writing, probably from something that says, don't listen to anyone else here. I know what's right. I know what we need to do. We need to make sure we stay safe, and we need to follow this particular person and what they are telling us to do. So writing from that can then help us to maybe do a better job of reaching what lives underneath that controller, which we often aren't able to hear because the controller is generally very, very loud in our head. They are highly based here in the mind, right? So they're gonna be loud. And oftentimes the controller is the one we hear first, but that doesn't make them right. And that's something that's important to know. The second battle of the parts that I wanted to talk about today is the controller versus the karma kid. Now, both of these parts are defenders, but they disagree in how best to maintain safety. This happens. A lot of battles that we have in our system are parts, like both parts being defenders. While they both have the idea of safety in mind, the way to get to safety is different depending on which part is kind of screaming at us the loudest at any given moment. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for joining. So when the controller and karma kid are in a battle, this is actually, next to the one I just mentioned, which is about anxiety, this is probably one of the most common manifestations in our system as far as problematic manifestations, which means our system is doing something that is not helping us live our best life, right? And this is that alternating feeling of being manic and being depressed, okay? So the manic energy comes in. When the manic energy comes in, that's the controller. The controller has decided that safety means doing as much as humanly possible, getting all the things you can get done, like working until you drop. Literally, your controller would do that. Like the dropping is not even metaphorical. The controller will take you to the edge. Like I have literally been on a controller manic episode where I have actually been whining because that's how exhausted and tired I am, and I am still up and running around. That's the controller in action. So that manicness, that manic energy, that's going to be the controller only when they're trying to avoid something, which, to be fair, can be a lot of the time. On the other side of that is the karma kid's futility. This is that depressive energy which will often paralyze us. So in the worst case scenario, you're talking about flipping between manic and depression, right? So we have all heard about this concept before. That is going to be the controller versus the karma kid. Now, this can happen though in much more subtle ways. It doesn't always have to be this huge swing from one side to the other. It can be, but sometimes it's just it's a more subtle battle where you're sitting there and you can't be really productive. You can do some things, but you can't really do what's on the list. And then you can hear the controller in the background of your mind listing off everything you're supposed to be doing, but you're not really doing it. Instead, maybe you're scrolling Facebook or you're sitting on the couch watching a movie or something, but and because they're both active, nobody's really moving, right? And nothing's going forward. Okay. And these are the moments when writing again is very helpful. Writing from the controller about how we need to get everything done or there's going to be a problem and we're going to be in trouble, but also writing from that karma kid who says generally, what's the point? Right? So this is a very, very important writing prompt when we are feeling that depressive energy, which, to be honest, even for those of us who are still pretty productive, there is often that depressive energy just below the surface, making things much less joyful and much less of a positive experience, or even really kind of dampening down our productivity significantly, at least in ways where maybe it's less impactful in our lives. A lot of times we'll see things where the controller's in charge all day at work and we run, and then as soon as we get home, we just crash and we can't do another thing because the karma kid has just taken over. We're not functioning anymore, right? So that is that battle between controller and karma kid. And the more that we can see it, the better for us. We can really begin to break down this battle and bring ourselves into balance, because manic, overproductive energy, although your controller will tell you that's the best kind, it really isn't. It's not good for us. Of course, neither is. What's the point? Futile, depressive paralysis. So our goal is to find a balance in this. And the best way to do that is to see the battle and work with the parts who are in the battle, writing from them so that we can begin to bring ourselves into some balance there. So my next pair of battling parts that we're going to see in a system, and this one is a toughie, I'm not going to lie, it's hard to get out of this one, is going to be the love seeker versus the isolator. Now, the love seeker is an inner child. The love seeker is a part that is really looking for someone to come along and fix their loneliness. Now, this isn't actually how it works in real life. We don't actually fix our loneliness by finding people out there in the external world to do that. That the love seeker believes that has to be possible because they're holding a lot of loss and a lot of grief, and they don't have any other way of dealing with it because their grief is blocked. Okay. So they're out there looking for someone to make it all better, even if it's just for a little while. However, we have an isolator, and I don't care how much of a person who hates being lonely you are, you still have an isolator, okay? The isolator is a freedom fighter, and they exist basically for the purpose of keeping us authentic by keeping us alone. They have zero trust in other people. So again, this could be highly unconscious to you, but it is there. I used to be someone who chased and chased and chased and chased. I was always looking for that person. And honestly, it did not matter if they were safe. It did not matter if they really actually liked me. I just needed another person. When I started this journey, I discovered an isolator of massive proportions. I mean, it was huge. And this is the interesting thing. Whether you have a tendency to kind of lean towards the love seeker side and you're more of a chaser, or you have a tendency to lean towards the isolator side, which means you tend to keep to yourself and that means you attract the chasers. Whichever one you are, you have the other one. As a matter of fact, the more extreme the one you have that you notice is, the more extreme the other one is. And that's true for all of the different battles. As we work with one, we pull both towards center. Okay. So when let's say you have that chasing energy, let's say you feel intense, painful, overwhelming loneliness when you are alone. Look for the other side of the equation, right? We want to definitely, right from the love seeker, we want to connect and feel their grief. But we also want to acknowledge, you know what, I've got an isolator who's working really hard to keep me alone. They don't do that as self-punishment. They're not trying to harm us. They're actually trying to protect our authenticity, because typically when we get into relationships, the first thing that goes is our authenticity. We don't set boundaries. Why? Because we never learned how. That's basically why we don't set boundaries. So the isolator is there to protect us from that. I like to picture them as sort of waiting in the wings. When a relationship starts up, and the controller and the karma kid and the love seeker, those are going to be the three parts that try to convince you not to have boundaries. When they get going, the isolator just sits back and waits. And when things get out of control and potentially abusive, and it's no longer okay, and our authenticity is gone, the isolator will step in and put up a wall. Okay. As we get older, by the way, the isolator gains strength. This is normal. If you've ever noticed how we have a tendency to have patterns where in our 20s and 30s, we're in and out of relationships and we're constantly trying in relationship. And then we hit about 40 and we're like, I'm done with this game. That's the isolator taking over. So working with these parts, writing from the love seeker, feeling the love seeker's grief as well, but then also looking for how that isolator is active. In what ways do they create separation between us and other people? What kinds of judgments do they use to keep us a bit distant from other people? In what ways do they maybe make excuses to keep you from connecting with others or going out with other people or spending time with other people? They have a lot of things that they will tell us that keep us alone. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not one of these people who thinks isolation is always bad. I think there is a place in our healing for isolation, because sometimes it's only in isolation that we can actually figure out who we are and what we want. Because when we have been basically erased, okay, which is what often happens in a childhood of trauma, when we've been erased, we basically look to everybody else to mirror to us who we are. That's not really who we are. We still exist, but we're kind of tucked down in there underneath all of those trauma responses. So it is incredibly helpful for us to be able to kind of understand, how that is all working in our system. The isolator will keep us a bit more isolated until we can figure out who we are and what we want, so that when we do get into relationships, we can actually set boundaries with people and say, no, I don't want that. No, this is important to me. No, I'm not willing to give this up, kind of stuff, because that's the only way we can eventually move towards healthy relationships with boundaries. So that's what we want to do. We want to connect with these two parts and hear what they have to say, and know that if we have one that's really extreme, the other one's in there. We may not be hearing from it, but it's there. It's active. It's screaming at us. And so that can be incredibly helpful for us to connect with. The next thing, the next parts battle that I want to talk about is the mean kid versus the karma kid. Again, these are actually both defenders. Although the mean kid acts more like a protective part than a true defensive part. It's a subtle difference, but the mean kid is actually quite protective of, for example, the inner children, whereas the karma kid and the controller can behave in more abusive ways to the inner children. So there is a slight difference between the mean kid and the karma kid and controller. And it can be good to recognize that, because the mean kid does not agree with the ways of establishing safety of the karma kid and the controller. Again, the defenders, they fight amongst themselves a lot, which also makes them a little bit weaker at times as well, which is why we are able to get through and do a lot of really great healing work, because the defenders are the ones that try to stop that, but they don't have a lot of cohesiveness in their approach to stopping that. So that gives us a little bit of power to get in there and, make changes happen. So the mean kid versus the karma kid. The general difference between these two parts is anger. Okay. The mean kid's very angry. And the mean kid is angry. Not only are they angry at the karma kid and controller because they've been blocking this anger for a really long time, but they're angry at a lot of other people and a lot of other things. They're angry at systems. They're very focused on justice. And you can imagine, in the world we live in today, they've got a lot of reasons to be angry. So they're very angry. Their anger doesn't always come out at what it really should come out at. The anger can come out at people who maybe are otherwise fairly innocent, but are triggering some of our old patterns or old trauma patterns. For example, the mean kid could come out at our children, and that is an unfortunate truth. And so they can be one of the reasons why generational trauma continues. They're not the only reason, but they are one of them. So when we are in a mean kid, karma kid battle, we will have bouts of anger and rage that will just seem to burst out of us, followed by really strong feelings of shame and guilt about that rage. The thing is, if the mean kid wasn't experiencing any blocks from the karma kid and the controller, then the mean kid wouldn't need to burst out with this rage, okay? The anger would be there. We would see the anger. We would express from the anger in more healthy ways, like writing. Rage on the page is one of my favorite phrases. Give it a try. Very, very helpful. So we would express from the rage because we would see it there. Unfortunately, the karma kid and the controller have a tendency to block that rage. So it builds and builds and builds while we don't see it there. And then boom, right? It explodes. When that happens, the karma kid comes up and tells us how awful we are for having gotten angry. This is usually based on the stigma we live in today, like we live with today, around anger in general, right? Society stigmatizes it more than likely. Your abusive family stigmatized it. Don't get me wrong. the adults were allowed to be angry, but not the children, right? So lots of stigmatization around anger creates this strong, guilty, shaming expression from the karma kid in response to the mean kid's anger. And yeah, Carol is asking, is the isolator mean as well? Can it be confused with the mean kid? So much of the time. It is almost always confused with the mean kid. As a matter of fact, what I often tell my clients is, don't try to figure out the difference between the mean kid and the isolator, because they can not only sound the same, but they can team up. Like if the isolator needs to get rid of somebody and put up a wall, they're going to yell at them. They may even employ the mean kid to help them. It's the most important part is, of course, doing the writing, like writing from the anger, regardless of which part it is. The big difference between the mean kid and the isolator is going to be the reason behind their anger. For the mean kid, they're still focused on safety. They're focused on justice. They're trying to rid the world of oppression, right? Like that's their mentality. Whereas the isolator wants to be authentic and needs to get rid of everyone else to do that. So they have different reasons for their anger, but the anger can sound very much the same. And I do think they team up. I do think they do, especially when they're fighting the controller, who can be very strong. So yes is the answer to your question, but also don't let yourself worry too much about it, because it can be one of those things where the controller will intellectualize a lot and be like, which one is it? Is it this part or this part? And it can pull you right out of the anger. So just kind of let it be there. But yeah, that's absolutely true. The last battle I want to mention real quick, because I know we're at 12:30, is the inner rebel versus the karma kid. So the inner rebel is a freedom fighter, okay? The karma kid's a defender. So these are going to be your two biggest battle points when you're crossing different types of parts. The inner rebel has an abhorrence for rules, and that can be almost any kind, even rules that are actually good and we actually need to follow. The inner rebel won't generally like them. So if you find yourself in a place where no matter what people say to you, you just want to do the opposite, you might have an inner rebel that's active. And that's fine. We need to get to know our inner rebel. We need to let them write. They will be angry. All freedom fighters carry anger. So let them write. Let them express their reasons for wanting to buck all of the rules that have ever been created by society in general, because that's probably dumb. They can lead us to a very beautiful place of understanding ourselves and our own authentic desires much better. But we have to express their anger first. But the other side of that is the karma kid. So when we start bucking rules and setting boundaries and standing up for ourselves and saying, I will not do what you tell me to do, the karma kid is often very close by, screaming, yelling at us about how much punishment we will endure for doing this. Now, in childhood, that may have been true, right? Like we may have literally experienced punishment when the inner rebel was active. That isn't necessarily true now, but the karma kid will try to find a way to make you think you're being punished even when you're not. Like they will correlate things like a flat tire, right? Or I don't know, a storm in another state. And they'll say this is happening because you set that boundary. Now, of course, we know it is not happening because we set that boundary, but that is exactly how that karma kid behaves and acts. And it can get really stuck in our head, truly, in ways that are kind of like sort of self-torture-ish. I'm not gonna lie. So Trisha's saying, I just feel like every part is fighting each other and me. I'm exhausted and drained from it. Of course you are. You are not alone, Trish, in that. But yes, we have to understand that parts are very black and white. This is why we have the battles. You're either this or you're this, right? The real answer lies in the middle, in the balance between the parts, of course. But the parts believe that they either win the battle or they lose completely. And to a part, losing is basically like death. So they are going to scream and yell and push and exhaust you and do things that are truly, really detrimental, both to your health and well-being and everything, to try to get their way, because they believe that the alternative is essentially death. So know that if you're in one of those intense battles, keep coming back to grounding and coming back into your body as best you can. important because the only one in that situation that knows, that has the perspective, is going to be the grounded adult self. When we are grounded, we can see that the battle is real to the parts, but it isn't necessarily real, right? So that's what we want to keep coming back to, is like, okay, this is a flashback. I can ground and know that this is a flashback, which is when we can really change things for ourselves in the long term, which I know you already know that. Nadia's saying, great to see you on live. Yeah, I'm really glad to be back. Thank you guys for your patience. This last month has been just consumed by various challenges, life coming at me with the start of school and illnesses and travel and everything else. But I am looking forward to be back on a fairly regular basis, depending on how my throat holds up, right? Because you guys also know that my parts tend to hit me right in the throat. So as long as that keeps working the way it's supposed to, I will be here. So thank you all so much for being here. And please know that I do have some openings for clients right now. If any of you are interested in working with me one-on-one, message me or send me an email. I'm at Elizabeth@beatingtrauma.com. That's Elizabeth with an S. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all so much for being here and listening. I know I went over 5 minutes, but you stayed with me, so thank you. I will talk to you guys next week, same time, same place. Thank you all. Bye.